Christmas lights glitter across Windsor Castle, soft golden hues flickering through frosted windows. But inside one quiet room, behind a heavy oak door, a single document sits under a reading lamp. Thick vellum, a crimson ribbon, the unmistakable weight of royal authority. And at the bottom, one signature that changes everything. Here's the part no one expected. King Charles didn't wait until spring. He didn't wait for the coronation anniversary. He didn't even wait for the new year. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. He chose Christmas. But why? Why? At the most family-oriented moment of the royal calendar, would King Charles sign a new set of letters patent, revoking the Sussex title just as divorce proceedings came to their final, bitter close? Let that sink in for a moment. Because this wasn't an accidental date. This wasn't a seasonal coincidence. This wasn't a random administrative update. This was strategic, emotional, symbolic, and, depending on who you ask, devastating. So let's start with the question you're probably already asking in your head. Would a king really remove his own son's title? Right before Christmas, right after a royal divorce, and right when the whole world is distracted by holiday photos, family dinners, and cheerful headlines? And if so, what pushed him to do it? Was it Harry? Was it Meghan? Was it the divorce settlement? Was it William? Was it the institution itself tightening its grip? Or was it something far quieter? Something happening behind palace curtains that none of us were ever supposed to see? Let's talk about it. Because the truth behind this moment doesn't sit neatly in fairy tales, royal PR statements, or glossy Christmas photos. It sits in timing, strategy, and a father's breaking point. And the deeper you go, the more this story stops being about titles and starts being about wounds. Let's begin. You probably remember the day Harry and Meghan left the monarchy, right? The Megxit headlines, the shockwaves around the world, the interviews, the book, the series, the allegations, the drama that seemingly refused to die. Every word, every accusation, every explosive moment added pressure to a decades-old institution already juggling modern scrutiny, political tension, and internal fractures. But here's what people rarely consider. Leaving the monarchy doesn't automatically remove your titles. Walking away doesn't erase centuries of royal protocol. Emotional fallout doesn't equal legal fallout. That's why the Sussex title remained intact. Even as the couple rebranded themselves, launched media deals, criticized the family, and created a global brand outside the confines of royal tradition. But that title, that one title, carried weight. Symbolic weight. Public weight. Political weight. Historical weight. It tied the monarchy to the Sussexes whether the palace liked it or not. And trust me, they did not like it. Especially in the last few years, as the narrative spiraled, the interviews sharpened, the book detonated, and the internal fractures widened. Now add the divorce. Yes, the divorce proceedings, messy, emotional, strategic, and far more impactful than the public realizes. And yes, you heard that right. Because once a royal marriage dissolves, especially a high-profile one involving titles, children, image, and global branding, everything changes. Everything shifts. Everything becomes vulnerable to review, revision, or revocation. Especially the titles. Especially when those titles start to overlap with PR disasters, legal disputes, custody battles, financial settlements, or public controversies. And you can imagine what the palace was thinking. If not now, then when? But wait. Let's zoom out for a moment. Let's talk about Christmas. Because this isn't just any date on the royal calendar. Christmas is the monarchy's annual soft power moment. Its tradition, its legacy, its image. It's the one time the family looks unified, even when it isn't. It's the yearly PR reset button. Charles knows this better than anyone. And that's why Christmas mattered. In fact, Christmas was the perfect moment. Think of it this way. When the world is busy celebrating. Families traveling, kids opening gifts, news cycles slowing down. Difficult stories, complicated announcements, or quietly filed documents often slip under the radar. Or more importantly, they land softly. And a revocation of the Sussex title? That needed to land softly. Not like a scandal. Not like a punishment. Not like public revenge. But like administration. Like routine housekeeping. Like a monarch simply doing his job. So what did Charles do? He used Christmas to soften the blow. to make the decision seem procedural, to frame it as duty rather than emotion. But make no mistake, it was emotional. Because revoking a title isn't just signing paper. It's erasing symbolism. It's rewriting identity. It's cutting a thread that once tied father and son together. So if Charles chose Christmas for this moment, you have to ask, was it strategy? Or was it heartbreak? But let's go even deeper. Because there's another layer here that almost no one notices immediately. The legal sequence. Do you see the order? Divorce proceedings end. Then the title is revoked. Then the letters patent go public. Then Christmas arrives. That's not random. That's not accidental. That's not spontaneous. That is deliberate timing. And every royal watcher knows the palace never moves without timing. So what does that timeline tell us? It tells us the monarchy waited. They waited until the Sussex marriage legally ended. They waited until the settlement was finalized. They waited until no title could be pulled into family court arguments. They waited until custody couldn't be influenced by royal associations. They waited until the Sussex brand was no longer united by marriage. They waited until the window was clean and clear. And only then did Charles sign. Why? Because the king needed a stable moment. A moment where action wouldn't interfere with legal battles. A moment where he could say, this is not personal. This is procedural. Even though it was absolutely personal. Especially for Harry. Especially for Meghan. Especially for the children. Especially for the public image of the crown. Now here's where this story gets even more fascinating. Because the question isn't just why now, it's who pushed. Royal decisions are never made alone. Not in modern times. Not in a monarchy forced to adapt every year. Not with global scrutiny. Not with family divisions at their peak. So ask yourself, was this truly Charles's decision? Or did William quietly push for it? Or senior courtiers? Or Camilla's PR team? Or external legal advisors? Or the institution itself, terrified of long-term brand damage? We don't have the full answers yet. But we do know this. No letters patent is ever signed without debate, without tension, without argument, without someone pushing back or pushing forward. Which means behind that quiet Christmas signing moment, there was a battle, a debate inside rooms we will never enter, voices we will never hear, arguments we will never read, concerns we will never fully understand. And yet, we feel them, don't we? We feel the tension. We feel the shift. We feel the break. Because this moment didn't just remove a title. It redrew a boundary. It redefined a family. It reset expectations for future royals. It signaled a monarchy no longer willing to tolerate rebellion, rogue branding, or public criticism from within its own bloodline. And that is why this story matters. Not just for royal fans. Not just for political observers. Not just for those curious about Harry and Meghan. But for anyone who's ever watched a family fracture. Anyone who's had to choose boundaries over relationships. Anyone who knows how timing can change everything. Anyone who's felt the sting of a silent decision made behind their back. Because while the monarchy calls it administrative, Harry calls it something else. Another betrayal. Let's pause. Imagine receiving the news that your title, your identity, your royal birthright, was legally stripped away during the holidays. Imagine hearing it not as a son, but as a father. A father whose children now grow up with a different standing than they did the day before. Imagine the phone calls. Imagine the anger. Imagine the guilt. Imagine the heartbreak. Imagine the silence that followed. We're going to explore all of that. But the introduction isn't just here to explain timing or hint at conflicts. It's here to set the emotional stakes. Because before we dive into the making and breaking of the Sussex title, before we examine Megxit, before we unpack the divorce, before we analyze the letters patent line by line, you need to understand something crucial. This isn't just a story about monarchy. It's a story about love, about loss, about identity, about control, about image, about power, about legacy, and yes, about revenge. The revenge of an institution. The revenge of a wounded king. The revenge of a father trying to repair an image, or protect a future, or assert a boundary, or perhaps all three at once. So where does this all lead? To the unanswered questions. What exactly was written inside the revocation? Why was the Sussex title targeted first? How will this affect the line of succession? What does this mean for Archie and Lilibet? Will this open the door to future title removals? Will the Sussexes fight back? Will Harry respond publicly or privately? And is this the beginning or the end of the Sussex versus monarchy Cold War? All of that is coming. But first, we need to step back in time. Because before a title can be revoked, you must understand why it existed, why it mattered, why it became controversial, why it became weaponized, and why it became the ultimate symbol of everything that went wrong. So let's go back to the moment the Sussex title was born. Back to the hope, the excitement, the unity. Back to the moment the monarchy believed they were turning a historic page. Because to understand this downfall, you must see the rise. And trust me, the rise was extraordinary. The crowds were screaming so loudly outside St. George's Chapel that day, you could barely hear the bells. Millions watching around the world. Cameras flashing. Voices echoing. A moment frozen in global history. And yet, beneath all that excitement, beneath the hats and smiles and perfectly curated pageantry, one single decision was being cemented. One decision that would define everything that followed. The creation of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Let me ask you something before we go further. If you could go back in time to that moment, 2018, Windsor, sunshine pouring over the castle, would you have predicted that this fairy tale title would become the most controversial title in modern royal history? Would you have guessed that this single title would be weaponized in interviews, legal negotiations, brand deals, and global headlines? Would you have imagined that this title would one day be revoked by the king himself, signed away just days before Christmas? Probably not. Because on that day, the Sussex title wasn't a controversy. It wasn't a political issue. It wasn't tied to media wars, Netflix deals, or transatlantic drama. It was a gift, a blessing, a promise, a symbol of unity. A new chapter for the monarchy. At least, that's how it began. Let's go back to that moment and unravel how a title meant to symbolize modernization and hope quietly became a ticking time bomb. Harry walked into his wedding day with the weight of his mother's legacy on his shoulders and the hope of a fresh start ahead. Meghan glowed, confident, poised, emotional. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a seismic cultural moment. It was history unfolding in real time. People lined up before dawn. Crowds filled the streets. Global networks set up temporary studios. Broadcasters whispered in astonishment at the sheer scale of it. The royal family, private by nature, suddenly found themselves at the center of something electric, something bigger than tradition. And the monarchy knew it. That's why the Sussex title mattered. It wasn't just ceremonial. It was strategic, intentional. It was a clear message from the crown. We are evolving. The world saw Meghan as a breath of fresh air. Biracial, American, divorced, modern, outspoken, media-savvy, compassionate. She represented something new, something global, something poetic. So granting the Sussex title was more than royal protocol. It was symbolism. It was an endorsement. It was a statement that echoed far beyond the gates of Windsor. And the palace loved that, at first. Now let's talk about how titles actually work for a moment, because this matters more than people realize. A royal dukedom isn't just a fancy name. It's identity. It's lineage. It's power. It's status. It's expectation. It defines everything. How you're addressed. How you're categorized. How your children are treated. How your public role is shaped. How tradition interacts with your life. How the monarchy uses you, or doesn't. When Harry became Duke of Sussex and Meghan Duchess of Sussex, the palace wasn't just giving them a nice title to dress up the wedding program. They were giving them a role, a responsibility, a legacy to carry, a direction for their future. At that time, no one thought they'd walk away. No one thought they'd reject the institution. No one imagined Netflix deals, or California homes, or explosive interviews. The monarchy believed the Sussexes would be their modernizers, not their disruptors, not their critics, not their adversaries. And this is where the irony begins. Because everything the monarchy celebrated in 2018 is everything they fought against in the years that followed. Let's go inside the palace the morning the title was announced. Senior courtiers stood ready with carefully crafted press releases. Communications teams finalized statements. Family members smiled politely as cameras captured every angle. And privately, Charles was proud. Proud of his son. Proud of the moment. Proud of how the world was responding. At that time, believe it or not, Charles saw Meghan as an asset, not a liability. Someone who could help connect the monarchy to new generations, new cultures, new countries, new conversations. He didn't foresee the storm that would come. The articles, the leaks, the podcasts, the documentaries, the memoir, the estrangement. None of that existed then. All he saw was hope. But hope is fragile inside an institution built on hierarchy. Because with titles come expectations. With expectations come pressure. With pressure comes scrutiny. And with scrutiny come fractures. Fractures that don't stay hidden for long. Let's talk about that early period, the honeymoon era. Harry and Meghan stepped into royal life with global excitement behind them. Every handshake, every engagement, every appearance, every speech. It all made headlines. Not British headlines, global ones. And here's where tension started, long before anyone realized it. The Sussexes weren't just popular. They weren't just modern. They weren't just charismatic. They were overshadowing others. And in the monarchy, overshadowing is dangerous. Public attention equals public power. Public power equals influence. Influence equals internal conflict. William and Kate had spent years becoming the steady, stable, traditional future of the monarchy. They knew their role, to preserve, not disrupt. But the Sussexes? They brought energy. They brought emotion. They brought unpredictability. They brought star power. And that started whispers behind palace walls. Too Hollywood. Too outspoken. Too unpredictable. Too big. Too fast. But on the surface, the Sussex brand was thriving. Their first overseas tour was electric. Crowds chanted Meghan's name. Harry looked revitalized. The palace loved the numbers, the attention, the global reception. But behind the scenes? Unease, jealousy, miscommunication, growing friction, and all centered around the title they carried. Because the Sussex title wasn't just a title anymore. It was becoming a brand. And brands come with consequences. Let me ask you something. Have you ever seen two people enter a relationship with different expectations for the future? One person imagines structure. The other imagines independence. One wants tradition. The other wants innovation. One wants stability. The other wants identity. That's what happened with the Sussex title. The monarchy assigned it based on tradition. Harry and Meghan used it based on identity. And those two visions were never going to align. Because Harry believed the title was modernizing power. Meghan believed the title was a platform. The palace believed the title was a duty. Three different definitions. One title. Inevitable conflict. But here's the biggest irony in this entire chapter. The Sussex title was created to unify, but it became the spark that fractured everything. Think about it. Without the title, they're just Harry and Meghan. With the title, they're global figures with royal influence. Without the title, they're celebrities. With the title, they're institutions. Without the title, the monarchy's connection to them weakens. With the title, their influence strengthens. That duality scared the palace. Because a title gives legitimacy, and legitimacy gives power. And power outside the institution is dangerous to the institution. That's why the Sussex title eventually became a threat. The very thing designed to elevate them became the very thing the monarchy wanted to control. Let's fast forward slightly. As early tension grew, staff disagreements, tabloid controversies, internal arguments, the palace began to see the Sussex title as complicated. And as Harry and Meghan began asserting independence, new projects, new foundations, new branding, new global attention, the Sussex identity became more and more theirs, and less the monarchy's. That's when conversations began. Quiet ones, private ones, behind closed doors. Should the title be restricted? Should the title be reviewed? Should the title be redefined? But removing a title prematurely would have looked cruel, public, punitive, emotional. So the monarchy waited for the right moment, waited for the right justification, waited for something to shift the balance. And eventually something did. But we're not there yet. Because before the Sussex title became a problem, it became a phenomenon. Let's explore why the Sussex title hit differently from other royal titles. For one, it was attached to the most rebellious royal in modern memory, Harry, a person shaped by trauma, media persecution, and a lifetime of being the spare. Second, it was attached to Meghan, a charismatic, outspoken, Media experienced American woman who understood branding better than half the monarchy's communication staff. Third, it was attached to a couple who resonated far more with younger and international audiences than the traditional royal lineup. The Sussex title was dynamic, modern, glamorous, compelling. It wasn't dusty or ceremonial. It was alive. But alive things evolve, and evolving things become uncontrollable. The monarchy couldn't control how the Sussex title was understood, or how it was used, or how it influenced the world, or how it shaped narratives the palace couldn't manage. And that lack of control was the beginning of the end. Let's shift to the emotional heart of this chapter. Because this story isn't just about a title. It's about identity. Harry didn't just inherit the title. He inherited expectations, burdens, wounds. Meghan didn't just receive the title. She received responsibility, scrutiny, pressure. Together, they held something powerful, a chance to reshape the monarchy. But powerful things attract conflict. And conflict inside a monarchy spreads fast. It spreads to staff, to family, to press, to politics, to global media, to public debate, to international attention. Soon the Sussex title wasn't a symbol of unity. It was a battlefield. And when something becomes a battlefield in royal life, it eventually becomes a casualty. So let's bring this chapter to its turning point. Because the question you're probably asking now is this. If the Sussex title began as a symbol of hope, how did it turn into a target? How did a wedding gift become a weapon? How did a title meant to unite become the tool used to divide? What exactly happened in the early years that transformed this fairy tale beginning into a bitter, public unraveling? And here's the real question that sets up our next chapter. Who caused the first fracture? Harry, Meghan, the palace, the media, or all of them together? Because the answer to that changes everything. And trust me, the next chapter will show you the first cracks that formed behind the scenes, cracks no camera caught, cracks that eventually blew the entire Sussex journey apart. The first fracture didn't happen on camera, not during a public event, not during a tour, not during an interview. It happened in silence, in a hallway, behind a closed door, after a meeting that was supposed to be routine. That's the part people never understand about royal breakdowns. They don't start with explosions. They start with whispers, small misunderstandings, tiny moments of tension so subtle that most people would ignore them. But inside the monarchy, nothing is subtle. Nothing is insignificant. Nothing is forgotten. And it was these little moments, the ones no journalist saw, no photographer captured, no press release acknowledged, that laid the foundation for the implosion that would come. So let's go back. Let's walk into the palace corridors and watch the Sussex story begin to bend. Long before it broke. Here's a shocking question to start this chapter. What if the royal family never intended for Harry and Meghan to fail? What if the system simply couldn't handle them? Think about it. You take two people who are passionate, emotional, outspoken, and modern, and place them inside an institution built on silence, hierarchy, stability, and control. It was never going to be a smooth fit. The palace machinery. The courtiers, press teams, protocol officers, advisors, runs like a centuries-old engine. It moves slowly, predictably, carefully. And then the Sussexes entered this machine like a spark hitting dry wood. Suddenly the world wasn't just watching the royals. They were watching Harry and Meghan, not as supporting characters, not as secondary figures, but as the main event. And that caused immediate tension, not because anyone was malicious, but because attention is power. And power inside a monarchy is always dangerous. Let's talk about what happened behind the scenes in those first few months. At first, palace staff adored Meghan. They said she was warm, engaging, interested, curious, eager to make an impact. But they also said something else, quietly, in private. She moves too fast. She doesn't understand the system yet. She wants to modernize everything at once. Meghan approached royal life like a high-stakes film set or a busy production office. Fast meetings, rapid decisions, direct communication, quick pivots, clear expectations. The royal household does not work that way. Everything takes time. Layers of approval, layers of tradition, layers of precedent, layers of quiet politics. So Meghan's energy and pace clashed with the system's slow, deliberate rhythm, and staff felt overwhelmed. It wasn't hostility, not at first. It was incompatibility. Imagine two groups speaking different professional languages. Imagine two cultures trying to merge without preparation. And Harry? He was stuck in the middle. But the tension wasn't just between Meghan and staff. It was between Harry and the institution. Because while Meghan tried to adapt to the system, Harry tried to protect her from it. He remembered what the institution did, or didn't do, for his mother. He remembered the silence. The lack of protection, how protocol was often used as an excuse for inaction. So when Meghan faced criticism, or unfair stories, or tabloid harassment, Harry expected the palace to protect her. He expected statements. He expected condemnation. He expected action. He didn't get it. And this is where one of the deepest emotional fractures formed. Harry felt abandoned. Meghan felt targeted. The palace felt pressured. Staff felt accused. Family members felt confused or defensive. From the outside, everything still looked polished and perfect. But inside, the temperature was rising. Let's zoom in on one specific moment that insiders still whisper about. A planning meeting for an upcoming engagement. Simple enough, right? Except the Sussexes arrived with a new idea, an approach they believed would modernize royal outreach. Staff weren't ready for it. Senior advisors didn't approve it. Other households didn't want the precedent it would set. Voices raised. Tension escalated. Harry walked out frustrated. Meghan left feeling unheard. Staff left feeling dismissed. No one left satisfied. It was a small moment. But small moments in royal life have long shadows. Because behind the scenes, a conclusion began to form. The Sussexes don't understand how the system works. And simultaneously, the system doesn't understand the Sussexes. Two parallel frustrations building every day. Now let's add another pressure point into the mix. The media, the tabloids, the relentless headlines, the narratives that fed tension like gasoline on open flames. But here's what most people misunderstand. The palace does not fight the press. Not publicly, not directly, not emotionally. Silence is their armor. Tradition is their strategy. Distance is their shield. But Harry? He doesn't believe in silence. He doesn't believe in letting his story stand. He doesn't believe in passive suffering. He believes in protection. He believes in speaking up. He believes in confronting the enemy. And he saw the media as the enemy. So when Meghan was targeted with headlines, many loaded with bias, exaggeration, or outright hostility, Harry expected the palace to defend her. They didn't. Or at least, not in the way he needed. And that's when the emotional crack inside Harry began to widen into a canyon. Because in his mind, the institution wasn't just failing Meghan. It was failing him. Again. Like before. Like with Diana. And that resentment shaped everything that followed. But let's address something crucial here. One thing most royal narratives completely ignore. There wasn't one villain. Not Meghan. Not Harry. Not Charles. Not William. Not the staff. Not even the institution. There were misunderstandings. Clashing expectations. Different worldviews. Different pressures. Different emotional histories. It was like watching two storms collide. Each fierce. Each justified in its own way, but utterly incompatible. And inside that collision sat the Sussex title. A title representing all the hope, all the ambition, all the pressure, all the wounds. A title that began as a gift and slowly became a burden. Here's another emotional truth you need to understand. Harry and Meghan weren't just struggling with staff or the press. They were struggling with family dynamics. William and Harry were drifting, not because they hated each other, but because they were becoming fundamentally different people. William embraced the role, the duty, the future king path, the stability, the hierarchy. Harry rejected it. He questioned it. He pulled back from it. He fought against the constraints. He rebelled emotionally, privately, publicly. And Meghan amplified that rebellion, not intentionally, but inevitably, because she encouraged independence, individuality, and emotional honesty. Two brothers who once moved as one began to move in opposite directions. And that shift added fuel to every disagreement, every miscommunication, every tension behind closed doors. Now let's talk about the staff again. Because staff are the backbone of the monarchy. They remember every precedent, every protocol, every tradition, every potential risk. And staff do not like unpredictability. Not because they dislike people who are unpredictable, but because unpredictability leads to chaos, and chaos leads to headlines, and headlines lead to crisis. So when Meghan came into the household with fresh ideas, modern approaches, new priorities, and a bold style, staff panicked. Not because she was wrong, not because she was difficult, but because she was different. And difference inside a monarchy is always met with resistance. Some staff felt disrespected. Some felt overworked. Some felt overwhelmed. Some felt excited. Yes, but even excitement breeds chaos. Meanwhile, the Sussexes felt unsupported, felt misunderstood, felt unprotected. Both sides felt wronged. Both sides felt justified. Both sides felt unheard. And that is the recipe for collapse. Let me give you an example of a moment insiders still mention. A communications disagreement. The Sussexes wanted to release a statement. The palace said no. Harry insisted. The palace resisted. Meghan felt exposed. Staff felt pressured. The family felt cornered. No one compromised. That one incident created weeks of resentment. And it set a precedent the palace feared. The Sussexes acting independently. Because in royal life, independence is a threat, not to individuals, but to the institution. Now imagine this happening again, and again, and again. Meetings ending abruptly, emails misinterpreted, requests denied, press stories spiraling, staff crying, Harry feeling betrayed, Meghan feeling isolated, senior royals feeling frustrated, advisors feeling powerless. Every day adding another layer of tension, and no one, absolutely no one, knowing how to stop it. Here's the part that hits hardest. Harry and Meghan truly believed the palace underestimated the pressure they were under. And the palace truly believed Harry and Meghan underestimated how much pressure the monarchy was under. Two worlds, two experiences, two perspectives, clashing with no bridge between them. The emotional toll was immense. Meghan began to feel that she was the outsider who would never be fully embraced. Harry began to feel his family was choosing institution over love, and that belief, true or not, became the emotional engine behind every future decision they made. By the end of that first year, the situation had quietly shifted. Publicly, the Sussexes looked radiant, smiling, working, touring, shaking hands, making headlines. But behind palace walls, the fractures were expanding, the stress was growing, the frustrations were simmering, the communication was breaking down. The emotional distance between Harry and the institution was widening. The Sussexes wanted change. The palace wanted stability. And neither side wanted to bend. And soon, those fractures would turn into the first crack the world could actually see. The night it all detonated started like any other. Quiet, still, unassuming. No bells of warning. No whisper of what was about to unfold. No signal that, within hours, the monarchy would experience one of its most shocking ruptures in modern history. But that's how earthquakes happen, isn't it? The silence before the fracture. The calm before the break. The stillness before everything falls apart. And when Harry and Meghan hit post on that Instagram announcement, they didn't just shake the palace. They shattered it. Let's rewind. Because Megxit wasn't a single moment. It was a buildup. A slow, painful accumulation of tension, mistrust, frustration, and emotional exhaustion. And by the time the announcement came, the escape was already in motion. Here's the mini-hook question that drives this entire chapter. What makes a prince walk away from a 1,000-year-old institution? Not a job, not a role, not a team, a dynasty, a monarchy, a global symbol. What makes someone born into the world's most exclusive institution say, I'm done? Is it pain? Is it pressure? Is it love? Is it trauma? Is it rebellion? Or is it something far more dangerous? A family war brewing quietly beneath the surface? Let's unpack it. By the end of 2019, everything had reached boiling point. Harry felt the institution resented his independence. Meghan felt unprotected. The palace felt overwhelmed by the Sussexes' unpredictability. The family felt overshadowed by their growing global fame. And the press? The press felt blood in the water. Every headline sharpened. Every photo dissected. Every rumor magnified. Every decision criticized. Harry and Meghan were no longer just royals. They were characters in a media war. And the couple realized something painful. They couldn't win. Not against the tabloids. not against public expectations, not against the machinery of the monarchy, not against the deep-rooted dynamics that governed everything behind palace walls. So what do people do when the system around them becomes unbearable? They look for the exit. Let's talk about Canada, the quiet turning point, the break, the pause, the time away. To cameras, it looked like a holiday, a winter escape, a family retreat. But insiders now admit something stunning. Harry wasn't sure he wanted to come back. And Meghan? She wasn't sure she could. Far away from the palace, from the staff, from the press, from the expectations, they breathed for the first time in months. Maybe years. No cameras. No protocol. No rules. No pressure. No briefing documents for every hour of the day. Just space. And that space sparked the most dangerous thing an unhappy royal can feel. Clarity. Clarity that life could be different. Clarity that peace was possible. Clarity that the royal bubble was suffocating them. Clarity that change wasn't just a dream, it was necessary. This wasn't rebellion. This was survival. Now here's where things get truly explosive. Because while the couple was in Canada trying to regroup emotionally, something else was happening inside the palace. Plans were being made for the upcoming royal year. Events, patronages, engagements, tours, announcements. And those plans included Harry and Meghan. Except, the Sussexes weren't planning to return. Cue the collision course. Let's talk about the Instagram announcement, the bomb. You remember it. Everyone does. Stepping back as senior members of the royal family, the shock hit every corner of the world within seconds. The press erupted. The public split. Commentators scrambled. But the most stunned reaction? The royal family. Because here's the truth that still shocks people today. The palace found out the same way the public did. Through the post. Through the screens. Through the notification. And inside the palace, chaos broke loose. Phones rang. Meetings were called. Princes were furious. Advisors were scrambling. Staff were blindsided. The Queen was caught completely off guard. It wasn't just a breach of protocol. It was an act of independence so bold it bordered on unprecedented. And it changed the relationship forever. But why did Harry and Meghan choose to announce it themselves? Because they knew how the palace worked. If they tried to negotiate it internally, the process would take months. If they tried to push the change quietly, it would leak. If they waited, advisors would water it down. If they asked for permission, it would be denied. They believed the only way to break the cycle was to break the system. And that's exactly what they did. Now let's discuss the Sandringham Summit. Oh yes, the meeting that felt less like a family discussion and more like a geopolitical negotiation. Picture this. The Queen, Charles, William, Harry. For people, one room. No Meghan. She called in from Canada. This was the moment everything was decided. 3 versions of the future were discussed. Version 1, remain full-time royals. Harry and Meghan rejected it. Version 2, half in, half out. Work part-time for the monarchy, part-time for their own careers. Harry believed it was the perfect compromise. The monarchy did not. Because half in, half out creates a crisis. What rules apply when? Who pays for security? Which engagements are mandatory? Which brand partnerships are allowed? What happens if commercial deals conflict with royal duties? The palace fears ambiguity more than anything. And the Sussex proposal was nothing but ambiguity. Version 3, step back completely. This was the one they accepted. But here's the painful truth. Harry left that meeting devastated. Because deep down, he thought the institution would bend. He thought his family would understand. He thought the monarchy would adapt. Instead, he was told, in the most polite, formal language possible, that the monarchy does not adapt for individuals, even if the individual is the king's son. One part of the summit is rarely mentioned. William's role. Not because he was cruel. Not because he was jealous. Not because he disliked Meghan. But because William was thinking as the future king, not as Harry's brother. He believed the monarchy needed strict boundaries. No exceptions. No risks. No half measures. And that difference in mindset, brother versus heir, created an emotional fracture so deep that it remains one of the central wounds of the entire Sussex saga. After the summit, the dominoes fell quickly. Harry and Meghan lost their HRH usage, lost access to certain royal privileges, lost the ability to represent the Queen, lost traditional funding. They gained freedom, yes, but they also lost identity. And that loss, that sudden emptiness, became the emotional core of the next few years. Because when you walk away from a system you've known your whole life, even for good reasons, you still feel the loss. Harry didn't just lose a role. He lost a family identity. Meghan didn't just lose a supportive institution. She lost the fantasy of a royal future she once believed in. And the monarchy didn't just lose two working royals. They lost control of a global narrative. Let's not forget the human side here. Leaving wasn't glamorous. It wasn't triumphant. It wasn't clean. It was painful. Harry was torn between two worlds. Meghan was trying to survive emotionally. The institution was trying to contain the fallout. The world was watching like it was a drama series unfolding in real time. They weren't strategizing. They were surviving. And then the deals. Netflix, Spotify, books, podcasts, interviews, series, brand partnerships. To some, it looked like monetizing royal fame. To others, it looked like reclaiming their voice. But to the monarchy, it looked like a threat. Because here's a crucial point. The Sussexes were no longer under royal control. But they still had royal titles. And that combination scared the institution more than anything else. A title is credibility. Credibility is influence. Influence is power. Power outside the palace is dangerous to the palace. And that fear became the seed of what Charles would later do. Revocation. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before Charles made his move, the Sussex journey had to go through more storms, more interviews, more revelations, more emotional pain, more public scrutiny, more family ruptures, more global debate. And those storms didn't just strain the monarchy, they strained the marriage. And that brings us to the next chapter. The moment the public didn't see coming. The moment the fairy tale began to fracture from the inside. Because the biggest twist in the Sussex saga wasn't the exit. It was what happened after. Imagine stepping out of a centuries-old institution and into a world where your every move can be monetized. Where fame isn't just an afterthought, it's currency. Where every interview, every handshake, every social media post carries potential dollars, brand equity, and global attention. This is exactly the world Harry and Meghan entered after stepping back from the monarchy. And it's here, in the glittering glare of Hollywood and the high-stakes deals that followed, that the Sussex title took on a life far beyond what the palace ever intended. Let me ask you this. What would you do if you held a title recognized by the world, but your institution was telling you it wasn't yours to leverage? Would you obey? Would you resist? Or would you find a way to redefine it on your terms? Because that's precisely what they did. After Megxit, Harry and Meghan were no longer merely royals. They were global figures. And global figures, in today's world, can be brands. The first big leap came with Netflix. Everyone knew a streaming deal was coming, but no one anticipated the scale. Dozens of projects, ranging from documentaries to scripted productions, all under the Sussex brand. The irony? The title, granted to them by the monarchy, became the seal of credibility on their content, a marketing tool with global reach. Think about it. A royal title designed to signify status and duty now symbolized influence and entrepreneurial freedom. Every Sussex, in the press, on posters, in logos, became a reminder that Harry and Meghan were no longer confined by palace walls. They had currency, they had a platform, and they had the power to define their own narrative. Spotify came next. Podcasts allowed Harry and Meghan to speak directly to millions, bypassing traditional media entirely. No filters, no palace-approved phrasing, no PR spin. Just raw perspective. And it was brilliant, but it also terrified the palace. Why? Because now the Sussexes were shaping public perception on their own terms. And public perception matters, especially when you are a monarchy dependent on symbolism, image, and unquestioned authority. Every episode, every word, every story challenged centuries of royal messaging. Even if it was subtle, even if it seemed harmless, the ripple effect was enormous. And then came the memoir, the book, the first detailed, unfiltered narrative from Harry's perspective. Claims, memories, admissions, critiques. Not just about media pressure, not just about Meghan's treatment, not just about palace politics, but about the family dynamics, the emotional toll, the fractured relationships. Imagine reading it as Charles, William, or the Queen. Every anecdote a reminder that control was slipping. Every revelation a public test of their authority. Every paragraph a warning. The Sussexes were not going quietly. The book, combined with streaming and podcast deals, cemented something critical. The Sussex brand was independent. It was powerful. It was untouchable. And it was profitable. Let's pause for a moment. Think about the duality. The monarchy wants to preserve dignity, maintain tradition, uphold protocol. Harry and Meghan are leveraging the exact same symbols, titles, names, patronages for maximum global influence. On paper, this is freedom. In reality, it's a threat. Because influence outside the institution undermines the institution. Because autonomy challenges hierarchy. Because the Sussex brand, while lucrative, exposed the monarchy's inability to contain its own family. And let's not forget the emotional layers. Harry had to reconcile his loyalty to family with his drive to protect his wife and children. Meghan had to navigate the global spotlight while maintaining her own identity and purpose. Every contract, every deal, every media appearance was a balancing act. Between financial independence, personal expression, and the lingering shadows of royal expectation. Imagine carrying the weight of centuries-old tradition while negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts. That's the pressure they faced. And the pressure built resentment, suspicion, and emotional fatigue, both for them and for the palace watching from afar. There's also the irony. The Sussex title, initially a symbol of honor, became a marketing asset. And the very institution that gave it, a family devoted to control and heritage, now saw it as a liability. Every reference to Sussex in the media, every deal branded under that title, was a reminder that this was no longer just a family matter. It was a public, global spectacle. And the monarchy's traditional methods of containment, protocol, silence, internal messaging, simply didn't work in the age of digital influence. Now, let's look at the palace perspective. Advisors were in crisis mode. The message was clear. The Sussexes are profitable. The Sussexes are influential. The Sussexes are uncontainable. Some courtiers recommended negotiation, compromise, or even pulling back entirely. Others whispered about legal avenues. Others simply warned about PR fallout. And Charles, as both king-in-waiting and father, he faced a dilemma. Protect the institution or protect the son. And as history has shown, the two are often incompatible. This period also marked a critical pivot in public perception. Fans of the Sussexes celebrated independence, applauded their bravery, and admired their entrepreneurial spirit. Critics accused them of exploiting royal status for personal gain. Even neutral observers were divided. And this division played directly into palace anxieties. A monarchy thrives on unified symbolism. The Sussexes were fracturing that narrative. Let's not forget another key point. The Sussexes were still human. The deals weren't just strategic. They were survival. They were self-expression. They were a way to claim identity in a world that constantly criticized and constrained them. Netflix, Spotify, books, these weren't just money-making endeavors. They were shields, megaphones, and platforms. And in a way, each deal became a subtle act of defiance. So when you consider the palace watching all this unfold, global attention, media narratives, public debate, brand proliferation, it's no wonder they eventually considered drastic measures. The Sussex brand had grown beyond containment. The title itself had become a double-edged sword, an honor for Harry and Meghan, a risk for the monarchy. And that risk planted the seed for what Charles would later do, the revocation of the title itself. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. Despite all the media scrutiny, the public discourse, the brand deals, and the political calculation, Harry and Meghan were still struggling with internal dynamics. Marriage stress, family estrangement, identity crises, emotional exhaustion. The brand was thriving externally, but internally, it was a different story. So here's the question to the audience. Would you have walked away? Would you have risked family relationships for autonomy and brand identity? Would you have survived the dual pressures of fame and family? Because every action taken by the Sussexes during this period laid the groundwork for the palace's eventual decision. Every contract, every interview, every public appearance, every deal, every brand partnership, it was all connected. And that brings us to the cliffhanger for this chapter. Because while Netflix, Spotify, and books were reshaping the global perception of the Sussexes, the next storm was brewing, not in Hollywood, but inside the monarchy. An even more personal, even more devastating confrontation was about to unfold. The first shockwave hit the palace like a storm with no warning sirens. One interview, 1 hour. 1 hour that rewrote decades of perception, fractured relationships, and shifted global opinion. And it wasn't just any interview. It was a seismic declaration broadcasted to millions, recorded and replayed across every media platform on Earth. Here's the truth. One interview can destroy centuries of goodwill if the words cut deep enough. And for Harry and Meghan, that hour wasn't just an interview. It was a weapon. Let me ask you this. How do you protect a family that the world can watch, analyze, and critique in real time? And how do you react when that family is, at the same time, your employer, your history, and your inheritance? It started subtly. Rumors, whispered commentary in tabloids, questions that were framed as curiosity but delivered as criticism. The palace tried to stay neutral. The Sussexes tried to assert narrative control. But soon, subtlety gave way to boldness. Enter Oprah, a conversation, a global audience. Intimate revelations about race, mental health, and emotional neglect. Allegations that pierced royal decorum, shattered perceived unity, and created a media firestorm the likes of which no previous royal could imagine. Millions watched. Millions debated. Millions reacted, emotionally, critically, passionately. Headlines weren't just reporting, they were verdicts. Some praised Harry and Meghan for courage. Some condemned them for betrayal. And in every living room, cafe, and news outlet, one question repeated. How could a son of the monarch speak like this about his family? But it didn't stop there. Soon, Harry's memoir arrived, a detailed, unflinching recounting of experiences that had been private for years. Every chapter, every paragraph, every anecdote was a revelation. Names were mentioned. Incidents were described. Perspectives were challenged. The monarchy was under scrutiny like never before. The public had direct access to a version of events shaped by Harry and Meghan. The palace, once the sole curator of royal narrative, found itself reacting instead of directing. And the fallout? Massive. Public opinion split. International media declared a crisis. Supporters cheered bravery and transparency. Critics cried betrayal and scandal. And the palace, silent as always, was forced into defensive posture. Let's pause and examine the emotional currents here. Harry had watched his mother, Diana, struggle under media scrutiny. He had lived through her pain, her isolation, and her ultimate demise. That memory lingered, shaping every decision he made. When Meghan faced relentless criticism, when the press attacked her character, Harry's response was visceral. Protectiveness blended with rage. Love intertwined with